The long simmering shadow war between Iran and Israel erupted into direct open conflict on the morning of June 13, 2025. In a highly coordinated and aggressive military action codenamed Operation Rising Lion, Israel launched a series of preemptive airstrikes against critical Iranian infrastructure. The stated objective was to dismantle what Israeli intelligence described as Iran's advancing nuclear weaponization and missile development programs. These strikes were not minor incursions. They represented a significant and deliberate escalation, moving the decades-long animosity between the two nations into a dangerous new phase of direct military confrontation that the world had long feared. The targets of Operation Rising Lion were carefully selected to deliver a crippling blow to Iran's strategic capabilities. Major nuclear facilities, including the well-known uranium enrichment site at Natanz and the heavily fortified underground Fordow plant, were struck with precision munitions. The Isfahan Nuclear Technology Center was also hit, alongside key military installations in major cities like Tehran, Tabriz, and Khorramabad. The attacks were designed to be both symbolic and destructive, aiming to set back Iran's military and scientific progress by years and send an unmistakable message of Israel's military reach and resolve in the face of perceived threats. The Israeli strikes went beyond infrastructure, targeting the very heart of Iran's military and scientific leadership. In what amounted to a decapitation strike, several of the nation's most senior figures were killed. The dead included the powerful head of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Hossein Salami, and the Army Chief of Staff, Mohammad Bagheri. Two prominent nuclear scientists, Mohammad Mehdi Tehranchi and Faridun Abbasi, were also among the casualties. This targeting of high-level personnel was a calculated risk, intended to sow chaos within Iran's command structure, but also virtually guaranteeing a furious and forceful response from Tehran. The immediate aftermath in Iran was one of shock, chaos, and immense human suffering. Iranian authorities quickly reported a devastating toll from the Israeli attacks, with at least 78 people killed and over 320 injured. While the exact breakdown between military personnel and civilians remained unclear in the initial hours, the impact on the civilian population was undeniable. Verified images and videos began to circulate, showing significant damage to at least 5 residential buildings in the capital, Tehran. These heart-wrenching visuals, some showing women and children among the casualties, underscored the tragic human cost of the Israeli operation and fueled the flames of retaliation. Iran's response was not a matter of if, but when. It came swiftly and with overwhelming force on the evening of the very same day, June 13, 2025. In a massive retaliatory strike codenamed Operation True Promise 3, Iran unleashed a barrage of missiles and drones aimed directly at Israeli territory. The scale of the attack was unprecedented in the history of the two nations' conflict. Iran announced that the operation was a direct and justified punishment for the earlier Israeli aggression, framing it as a necessary act of self-defense to restore national honor and deter any future attacks on its sovereignty and people. The skies over the Middle East became a theater of war as Iran's arsenal was put into motion. The attack involved over 150 ballistic missiles and more than 100 advanced drones, launched in coordinated waves to overwhelm Israel's sophisticated air defense systems. Sirens wailed across Israel, from the northern borders to the southern deserts, forcing millions of citizens to rush to bomb shelters. Residents in major urban centers like Tel Aviv reported hearing loud explosions as the night sky was lit up by the streaks of interceptor missiles and the fiery impacts of those that broke through the defensive shield. Israel's military, alongside limited defensive support from the United States, scrambled to counter the incoming threat. The Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Arrow air defense systems worked furiously to intercept the drones and missiles, with many being successfully neutralized before they could reach their targets. The Israel Defense Forces reported that most of the drones were shot down outside of Israeli airspace, a testament to the country's multi-layered defense strategy. However, the sheer volume of the Iranian barrage meant that some projectiles inevitably slipped through, bringing the war directly to Israeli cities and towns in a terrifying display of force. The impact on the ground in Israel was immediate and tragic. Despite the high interception rate, the attack resulted in at least 3 fatalities. 2 people were killed in central Israel and a woman lost her life in a suburb of Tel Aviv. Dozens more were injured, with at least 2 individuals reported to be in serious condition and 18 others suffering from light injuries. The psychological toll was immense. as the sense of security for many Israelis was shattered. Hospitals across the country activated emergency protocols, moving patients to underground facilities to protect them from further strikes, a stark illustration of the nation bracing for a prolonged and violent conflict. The escalation on June 13 sent immediate shockwaves far beyond the borders of Iran and Israel, triggering significant global economic and logistical disruptions. One of the most immediate and predictable consequences was a sharp spike in global oil prices. As news of the direct military exchange spread, markets reacted with alarm to the instability in a region critical to the world's energy supply. Compounding the issue, Israel shut down its largest natural gas field as a precautionary measure, halting vital gas flows to neighboring Egypt and Jordan, and forcing Egypt to activate an emergency energy plan to cope with the sudden shortfall. The conflict also brought international travel to a grinding halt across a vast swath of the Middle East. Fearing for the safety of civilian aircraft, aviation authorities took swift action. Airspace was completely closed over Israel, Iran, Jordan, and Iraq, creating a massive no-fly zone that severed major international air routes connecting Europe and Asia. The closures caused a cascade of flight cancellations, diversions, and delays around the world, leaving thousands of passengers stranded and forcing airlines to scramble to reroute their fleets around the newly established conflict zone, adding hours and significant costs to long-haul journeys. For the people living in the affected nations, daily life was upended by fear and uncertainty. In Israel, the constant threat of missile impacts forced a nationwide state of high alert. The U.S. Embassy in Israel issued a shelter-in-place directive for its personnel, reflecting the gravity of the situation. In Iran, the government took measures to control the flow of information and prevent public panic by temporarily restricting internet access in certain areas. Citizens in both countries were gripped by the terrifying reality of a full-scale war, a stark departure from the covert operations and proxy battles that had defined the conflict for so long. The environmental consequences of the Israeli strikes also raised serious concerns. Following the attack on the Natanz nuclear facility, international monitors detected chemical and radiation pollution inside the site. While initial reports reassuringly indicated that the contamination had not spread beyond the facility's perimeter, the incident highlighted the catastrophic risks associated with targeting nuclear installations. The potential for a wider environmental disaster, should the conflict continue to escalate and damage containment structures further, added another frightening dimension to the already perilous crisis unfolding in the region. The international community reacted with universal alarm as the Middle East lurched toward the brink of a wider war. The United Nations Secretary-General immediately issued a statement imploring both Iran and Israel to exercise maximum restraint and step back from the abyss. Leaders across Europe and the Middle East echoed this call for an urgent de-escalation, expressing deep concern over the potential for the conflict to spiral out of control and engulf the entire region. The diplomatic channels buzzed with activity as world powers grappled with how to contain the crisis and prevent further bloodshed. Major world powers offered varied responses reflecting their distinct geopolitical alignments and interests. The United States, under the administration of President Donald Trump, clarified that it was not involved in Israel's initial strikes, but unequivocally affirmed its ironclad commitment to providing defensive support for its key ally. In contrast, Russia condemned Israel's preemptive attacks as a violation of international law and offered to mediate between the warring parties, seeking to position itself as a key power broker in the escalating conflict. These differing stances highlighted the complex international dynamics at play. Regional powers, caught in the middle of the escalating tensions, voiced their own strong condemnations and pleas for calm. Nations like Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and the United Arab Emirates, all with complex relationships with both Iran and Israel, condemned the Israeli airstrikes that initiated the confrontation. They urged both sides to pull back from further military action, deeply worried that a full-blown war would destabilize the entire region, disrupt their economies, and potentially draw them into a conflict that none of them desired. Their statements reflected a shared regional fear of the devastating consequences of an unrestrained war. These dramatic events on June 13, 2025, mark a pivotal and dangerous turning point. The long-standing proxy war has now transformed into a direct and overt military conflict, fundamentally altering the strategic landscape of the Middle East. This escalation did not occur in a vacuum. It followed months of rising tensions and a recent declaration by the International Atomic Energy Agency that Iran was in breach of its non-proliferation obligations. The world now watches with bated breath, hoping that diplomacy can prevail over the drumbeat of war and pull the region back from a potentially catastrophic confrontation.